Hey everyone, get ready because today we're going deep, really deep into the excretory system.
Uh-oh. Sounds messy.
Well, maybe a little, but trust me, it's way more fascinating than you might think. We're diving into the research you sent us all about the human urinary system.
Yeah, those kidneys, they do a lot more than just make pee.
That's what I'm talking about. We're going to break down how those bean-shaped wonders filter our blood and keep everything in balance.
It's interesting when you think about it, maintaining that balance, it's really what the expiratory system is all about, like a tightrope walk for the body, keeping everything running smoothly.
Okay, I like that analogy. So the excretory system, it's like the balancing pole, keeping us from falling off the tightrope.
Exactly. And your research really emphasizes this, especially those BIO 103 lecture notes on the urinary system. It's all about removing waste products and excess stuff so they don't build up and cause problems.
Right, because too much of anything can throw things out of whack. So it's like having a dedicated cleaning crew working nonstop behind the scenes to keep things tidy.
You got it. And speaking of cleaning crews, it's amazing how different organisms have developed different ways of getting rid of waste. Some creatures use their skin, others use their lungs.
Okay, wait a minute. Lungs? I can kind of see how that works, but what other weird ways are there?
Believe it or not, some even use their eyes.
No way. Eyes. How does that even... You know what? Never mind. Maybe that's a deep dive for another day. But for now, let's stick with the human urinary system. The kidneys, of course, but also the ureters, bladder, and urethra.
Yeah, that team of four, they work together to filter the blood and control all kinds of important things. Blood volume, blood pressure, electrolytes, even the pH balance of our blood.
Wow, it's mind-blowing how it's all connected.
Yeah.
But let's go back to those kidneys for a minute. I mean, filtering over 140 liters of blood a day, that's insane. Like filtering an entire bathtub several times over.
Absolutely. And the way they do it is incredible. They have this really intricate structure.
Well, I know they have an outer layer called the cortex and an inner layer called the medulla. I even remember reading about these pyramid-shaped things inside.
Those are the renal pyramids, and they act like little funnels, collecting urine and channeling it into the renal pelvis. Then it's down the ureters to the bladder.
So it's like a super efficient internal flow system. But if the kidneys are constantly filtering, do they ever get a break? Or are they just going 24/7?
That's a good question. They are always working, but the activity level can change depending on things like hydration and what the body needs at that moment. They're masters of adapting, constantly adjusting to keep that balance we keep talking about.
It's like they have their own control panel, making sure everything's running smoothly. Amazing.
Yeah.
But when I was reading about this, I kept seeing this word, nephrons. Something about those being the real workhorses of the kidneys.
That's exactly right. Nephrons, those are the microscopic filtering units. And get this, there are over 1 million of them in each kidney.
1 million. Seriously, talk about a dedicated workforce. But are they all the same, or do they have, like, specialties?
Actually, there are two main types. Cortical nephrons, those mostly hang out in the cortex, the outer part. But then you have the juxtamedullary nephrons.
Juxta what now?
Juxtamedullary. They have these longer loops that extend deeper into the medulla, and that's important for concentrating urine, especially when you don't want to lose too much water.
Ah, so it's like having specialized teams, each one handling a specific part of the filtering process. I'm starting to get the picture, but what I really want to understand is, how do these nephrons actually filter the blood?
Okay, well, imagine each nephron as a tiny little assembly line. It all starts at the renal corpuscle. That's where the filtration begins.
So what's happening there?
Well, you have this bundle of capillaries called the glomerulus, tucked inside a little cup-shaped thing like Bowman's capsule. The glomerulus acts like a superfine sieve, filtering the blood based on the size and charge of the molecules.
So it's like a microscopic bouncer deciding who gets into the club?
Pretty much. And the stuff that gets filtered out, we call that filtrate.
Filtrate, got it. So what happens to that? Where does it go?
Well, from there, it travels through this series of tubes, the proximal convoluted tubule, the loop of Henle, and the distal convoluted tubule. That's where all the magic happens, the reabsorption and secretion. And then finally, it hits the collecting duct, like the last checkpoint before it heads out as urine.
Hold on. Reabsorption and secretion.
Uh-huh.
Those sound like pretty important steps. What exactly are they doing? Is that just more filtering?
Not exactly. Reabsorption is like giving valuable molecules a second chance. It's about reclaiming the good stuff that got filtered out, like glucose, amino acids, electrolytes. You don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Right, makes sense. Our bodies are pretty efficient like that. So if reabsorption is bringing things back in, then what's secretion?
Secretion is the opposite, adding the finishing touches, you could say. It's about moving extra stuff from the blood into the filtrate. Things like excess potassium or hydrogen ions. This fine-tunes the composition of the filtrate to make sure waste is removed and the body's chemical balance is maintained.
Okay, so it's like a two-way street, some stuff going back in, some stuff being added. It's incredible how much is going on down there at the microscopic level.
Yeah.
But you mentioned earlier that the composition of the filtrate actually changes as it travels through the nephron. What did you mean by that?
Ah, you're picking up on the details. Remember that initial filtrate that forms in the glomerulus? Think of it like a first draft. It's got water, waste products like urea, some salts, and even some good stuff like glucose.
Right, because the glomerulus, it's casting a wide net at first, catching both the good and the bad.
Exactly. And then as that filtrate travels through the different parts of the nephron, it's like it goes through a series of revisions and edits.
And the proximal convoluted tubule, with all those microvilli, that's where a lot of that reabsorption happens, right?
Exactly. Those microvilli, those tiny finger-like projections, they increase the surface area so more good stuff can be reabsorbed back into the bloodstream.
So it's like a mad dash to grab those valuables before they're lost forever. What happens next?
This is where things get really cool. The filtrate enters the loop of Henle, which is this hairpin-shaped loop that dips down into the medulla and back up again. And you know what? It's actually one of the key players in concentrating urine and making sure you don't lose too much water.
Okay, I'm picturing a water slide for filtrate. But seriously, how does a loop concentrate urine?
Imagine the medulla of the kidney like a salty sponge. The deeper you go, the saltier it gets. Now, the descending limb of this loop is permeable to water, but not to salts. So as the filtrate goes down, water gets pulled out by osmosis toward the higher salt concentration in the medulla. This makes the filtrate more concentrated, saltier, as it reaches the bottom of the loop.
So the descending limb, it's like a dehydrator, right? Pulling the water out.
Perfect analogy. But here's the twist. On the way back up, in the ascending limb, the rules change. It becomes impermeable to water. So now water is trapped inside, but salts can be pumped out.
So water goes out on the way down, salts go out on the way up. Interesting strategy.
Yeah.
And that pumping action keeps the medulla salty, right? Like maintaining that salty sponge environment you were talking about. But how does the filtrate go from super salty to just the right amount of salty before it leaves the body?
That's where the collecting duct comes in, the last stop on this amazing journey. It's like the final editor, fine-tuning the concentration of the urine based on what the body needs. And guess what? There's this hormone called antidiuretic hormone, or ADH, that plays a big role in this.
ADH, I've heard of that. Doesn't it have something to do with thirst? Like when you're dehydrated?
Okay, you got it. When you're dehydrated, your body releases ADH, and it acts like a signal to the collecting duct, telling it to become more permeable to water. This way, more water can be reabsorbed back into the bloodstream so you don't lose too much. Ever notice how your pee is darker when you're dehydrated? That's ADH doing its thing.
So it's like a water conservation measure. What about when you're well hydrated?
When you're well hydrated, ADH levels are low, so the collecting duct doesn't reabsorb as much water. This means more water gets excreted, and your pee is more dilute, lighter in color.
It's amazing how hormones can orchestrate all of this. It's like a delicate dance, making sure everything stays balanced.
It really is. And this whole interplay between the nephrons, the hormones, and that concentration gradient in the medulla, that's how our bodies maintain the perfect water balance. Keeps us functioning at our best.
We've been focusing a lot on the kidneys, but we can't forget about the other key players in the urinary system. The ureters, bladder, and urethra. What are the roles in all of this?
You're right. Let's not leave them out. Once the urine is formed in the kidneys, it travels down those muscular tubes, the ureters, to the bladder. You can think of them like one-way streets, making sure the urine keeps flowing in the right direction.
And the bladder, that's like the holding tank, right? Storing urine until it's time to go.
Exactly. It's pretty impressive how it can expand and contract as it fills up. And here's a fun fact. The bladder walls have these special stretch receptors that send signals to the brain when it's getting full.
So it's like a built-in alarm system letting you know when it's time for a bathroom break.
That's it. And then, of course, you have the urethra, the final pathway for the urine to exit the body. You know, it's really fascinating how such a seemingly simple system with just 4 main organs can do such complex and important things.
I agree. The kidneys are definitely the stars of the show with those intricate nephrons and all the hormonal control. But did you come across any other cool details in your research?
Oh, yeah. I remember reading something about the glomerular filtration rate, or GFR. And then there was another term, creatinine clearance. Something about how those can tell you a lot about how well your kidneys are working.
You're right on the money. Those are key indicators of kidney health.
I'm starting to see how it all fits together, like getting a glimpse under the hood to see how the engine is running. And speaking of under the hood, I remembered another interesting tidbit from the research. Something about the way blood flows through the glomerulus being unique.
Ah, yeah, that's a good one. It's one of those little anatomical quirks that make you realize just how finely tuned our bodies are. So usually you have capillaries draining into venules, those tiny veins, which then carry the blood back toward the heart.
Right, I remember learning that in basic biology. But in the glomerulus, it's different. The blood flows out through the efferent arteriole, not a venule. It's the only place in the whole body where an arteriole drains a capillary bed.
Wait, so it's like a reverse flow. Why is it like that? What's the point?
Well, it's all about maintaining the pressure needed for that ultrafiltration we were talking about. Having an arteriole on the outflow helps regulate the pressure within the glomerulus, making sure the filtration process runs smoothly and efficiently. It's kind of like having a pressure valve on a garden hose. You can adjust it to control how strong the water spray is.
Makes sense. It's like a high-pressure system for optimal cleaning. But, we talked about how a decrease in GFR could be a sign of chronic kidney disease or CKD. What does that actually mean? How serious is it?
CKD is a big deal. It affects millions of people around the world, and it's a serious condition. It basically means the kidneys are slowly losing their ability to function properly. And like we said, GFR is one of the main ways to measure that decline.
So as the filtration rate goes down, that means more waste products are building up in the blood.
Right, and that can lead to all sorts of other health problems. It's like a domino effect.
So I guess early detection is key, right? Catching it before things get too bad.
Exactly. It's important to be aware of the signs and symptoms and get regular checkups, especially if you have any risk factors.
So we're not giving medical advice here, but generally speaking, what can people do to keep their kidneys healthy and maybe prevent or slow down CKD?
Well, a healthy lifestyle is always a good foundation, right? Things like managing blood pressure, keeping blood sugar levels in check, staying hydrated, those are all important. And it's a good idea to avoid overusing over-the-counter pain relievers, too.
Good to know. It's a reminder that we really need to take care of those kidneys. They're working hard for us every day. Well, we've covered a lot of ground today, from the big picture of the urinary system down to the tiny details of nephrons, and even touched on things like GFR and creatinine clearance. It's amazing how much there is to learn about these filtration machines we call kidneys.
I agree. They're pretty amazing organs.
I'm curious, what's your final takeaway for our listeners today? What's something they can ponder after we wrap up?
Here's a thought. We've seen how important the kidneys are for our overall health. So what can we do with this knowledge? How can we advocate for more research on kidney disease, raise awareness, and push for better healthcare practices? It's something we should all be thinking about.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power. Knowledge is power. And it's up to us to use it to make a difference. Well, listeners, I hope this deep dive has given you a newfound appreciation for your own excretory system. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those kidneys happy and healthy. You know what else I found interesting? It was that whole process of ultrafiltration happening in the glomerulus.
Yeah, where the blood gets filtered based on size.
Right, like a superfine sieve. So I was thinking, if the filtrate goes through all those twists and turns in the nephron, why is it that the initial filtering in the glomerulus has to be so precise?
Oh, that's a great question. It's like that initial filtering, it's the first line of defense, you could say. It sets the stage for everything else that happens downstream.
So if something slips through that shouldn't, there's no going back.
Well, not exactly. The nephron has some amazing reabsorption abilities further down the line, like we talked about.
Right, reclaiming those valuable molecules.
But think about it this way. If the glomerulus wasn't so good at its job, if it let through too much stuff that shouldn't be there, the rest of the nephron would be overwhelmed.
It'd be like trying to clean up a giant mess all the time. Makes sense.
Makes sense.
So it's all about efficiency, right? Starting with a really clean filtrate, as clean as possible.
Exactly. And to answer your question about why it has to be so precise, well, the glomerulus is designed to keep out larger molecules like proteins and blood cells. Those are too big to fit through those tiny pores.
Okay, so it's like a size filter. And then everything else, the smaller stuff, that gets filtered out later.
Exactly. It's all carefully orchestrated to make sure the right things stay in the blood and the waste products get removed efficiently.
Well, I think we've pretty much covered everything about the urinary system, from those amazing kidneys to the ureters, bladder, and urethra. It's incredible how it all works together.
It really is a fascinating system and so important for our overall health.
Absolutely. It's been a real eye-opener, that's for sure. So listeners, we hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the excretory system. Until next time, stay curious and keep those kidneys happy.